he died, she kind of disappears from the historical record. And I wanted
Uh-huh.
to know more about her. So I have a huge personal library of ancient Egypt. So I decided to just start reading. And then I was like, this is a story I want to tell.
Hmm.
Women from this time, growing up in this time, it was so turbulent back then because first their dad introduced monotheism, and then they had to reintroduce all the gods again and restore everything that their dad took down. And I thought that was such a fascinating story. So that was my first novel. I wanted to learn more about the time period still, so I went back and I wrote a second novel about their older sister, and it's set a little earlier when they established that new capital and everything. I just am so fascinated by ancient Egypt itself,
Hmm.
but I'm also a huge reader and I love fantasy. And I knew I wanted to get into that genre as well because, growing up, I read a lot of science fiction and fantasy, and I just wanted to create some new characters that, when I was growing up, there wasn't a whole bunch of females in it. There's maybe one, then everyone else would be a guy, and they typically fit into a certain stereotype. And I wanted to create more than just, one character. I wanted to have characters who were joked around with each other, who made
Hmm.
mistakes, who got angry sometimes. I remember in A Wrinkle in Time when I read that and the main character got angry with herself. I'm like, oh my gosh, I feel that way too. That's never been in a book I've read before where the girl got angry. That was a lot of motivation for me to write this trilogy that's Arthurian inspired. At first, it wasn't. It was just more about a wishing well and just kind of this world in a wishing well. And if you throw the coins down and you imbue them with a wish, what kind of power is that? And how can you use that? And what if evil people got a hold of that and used it for nefarious purposes? And then when I
Nice.
tied in some more history, it just kind of all clicked together. I brought in some of the legends, some of the women from that time, and yeah, this journey has really been about things that I love to read, things I want to know more about. I also watched a lot of science fiction growing up, so I wrote a little sci-fi novella, kind of in between all that. So, yeah, I like delving into all the things that make me happy. And now I am finishing up a children's book. So I'm just going all over the place now.
Oh,
Wow.
that's
Yeah, we
awesome.
can definitely call you multi-genre.
I like that. I just doing it. I don't like being defined by just one thing. I love
Mhm.
exploring all different things. There's so much out there to explore, and it's kind of like space itself. That's always fascinated me because it's endless. What else is out there? That
Mhm.
just gets me all excited. So
Talking Dave's language.
I figured I might be sci-fi
Yeah.
author.
Yeah, absolutely. So I noticed that on one of your Facebook posts that you said you joined Hive as an alternative to Twitter. There's a lot of this going on at the moment for various reasons, mostly one very big reason. Um, so I was just wondering, how are you finding Hive, and would you recommend that for other authors?
So right now, it's kind of frozen in time. Like every time I've gone on it, I have the same kind of Hive welcome page, the same posts. It won't refresh. So I don't know if it's
Mm.
just my phone or if it's the algorithm. Like I'm trying to find new people and
Mm.
follow them and then maybe get some more interaction. Right now, I've been more like I feel like I need to learn more and find more people. And it isn't as easy to follow as say Instagram or even Twitter with the hashtags. Like I try and find bookish stuff and there's only a few things. So I think it's still kind of developing. It's
Mhm.
very early, but I have found it also takes a while to load. Like it's not as quick
Mm.
as the other apps have been. So it makes it difficult to post. I've tried to post a few things and my photos don't upload. So I'm just like, well, forget it.
Mm.
I'll just
Yeah.
put that on Instagram instead.
Yeah.
So,
I think a lot of these services at the moment, because of the kind of mass exodus, I think a lot of them are actually overloaded. I signed up to Mastodon, and where a lot of people have gone, and it's like there's been some teething problems with that. It's like, you can, like, you're trying to do things and everything's just very slow, or certain bits just don't work the way they should, and it's just all down to the fact that they're overloaded. The Mastodon server that I've joined, well, I moved from the one I first joined to a Canadian one, and their users went from, I think it was like 500 to 12,000 in about a week.
Wow.
So yeah, there's a lot of movement out there at the moment. So yeah, anyway, just interesting. Thank you.
Yeah.
So those people are coming from Twitter?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And
I've also seen it on Instagram too. A lot of people post on Instagram.
And these platforms like Twitter, they operate the same way?
They vary. I mean, Mastodon's quite different. It doesn't have like things like the text length issue. So there's no limit. Nobody actually owns Mastodon. It's open source, and the servers are all basically funded through donations and what have you. So there's nobody owning it, nobody controlling it. There's no algorithms pushing anything. So any kind of like growth and what have you is organic.
Right.
There's no kind of like algorithms kind of like pushing hit posts and stuff like that to wind people up. So I actually quite like the environment. It's I mean, it's like everything. I mean, there's a certain learning curve, but it's not super difficult or anything. It's just a little bit different to like, say, Twitter or.
I still haven't learned Twitter, so I don't do Twitter. I should say I don't do it. My wife does it for me. She looks after all my social media other than Facebook. I look after Facebook because Facebook's easy. I find I get my most interaction on the Facebook just because you can actually communicate. Whereas Instagram, you can't communicate really. I find it difficult to follow the posts. Same with Twitter. It's just silly things on Twitter. And TikTok, I'm just too old for TikTok, so I know that's supposed to be a good way to promote your books as a person, but I can't.
I think there's also a lot of security issues with TikTok.
Yeah. A lot.
Yeah.
Are you on it, Jalen? Are you on TikTok?
I'm on TikTok, and I found that sometimes when I share my TikTok videos to Instagram, I've been Instagram banned because sometimes I use background music from TikTok. It says it's free. But then Instagram's like, nope, these countries cannot see this. You can't play it in these countries. And then they just like take down my post. And one time they totally blocked my account. So that's why I was like, I'm going to try Hive. I am so sick of Instagram right now. I mean, I'm not that popular. I have like 500 followers. I'm like, who is picking on me here? It's like, I'm not an influencer. Yeah. Why are you banning my account? It's just me being, older, not quite getting all the rules. So
it's probably more likely copyright violation.
Yeah, I bet that's what it is, but
that's what they
I don't know. Let me share. I figured I could, so
yeah. Why doesn't it stop you? Jeez.
I know.
So Jalen, this is one thing I want to ask you. I like finding out about different authors. Do you recall the time when you decided you wanted to actually be an author? I know we always write stuff, especially in school, that you have assignments and stuff like that. But do you recall vividly the time where all of a sudden you said, I love writing stories and I actually want to be a published author? Is there a time that you can recall, or it just sort of evolved?
It's definitely something that evolved. I would say after my self-published books came out, I had some friends who were small market published, and that's when I was like, I really want to do it that route. Like have someone else help with editing, cover design, and someone who's just kind of a cheerleader who is excited about your work as much as you are, because being self-published is so hard sometimes. You have to do all your own promotion, reach out. You don't always hear feedback from people. And if you do, sometimes it's not the most positive, and that's fine. Everybody has an opinion, and I totally respect that. But having that team behind you really gives you that encouragement that sometimes as authors, buried in our own little worlds, we need to hear that sometimes. So when I started writing my trilogy, when I really wanted to do this a different way, I wanted to have that team. And I was lucky enough to connect with a publishing company, Inklings Publishing, down in Houston, mostly because I have a friend who I know on here earlier, Meg Hofdahl. She was published through them first. So she kind of was like, you should check out this company. I've been published through them. They've been fun to work with. They have a great developmental editor and everything. And they took me on. The first time I sent it over, they were like, I like it, but I'd like some edits. If you can come back with these edits, we'll talk further. And so I did. I spent a whole weekend going through all the suggestions and everything, and I sent it back, and they're like, let's do this. Let's roll. And it's been a great experience to have that behind me, because I feel like it's helped make my work a lot better too. Having other sets of eyes reading it, So that was really I really felt like I kind of feel like an author now. Like, it's cool to have my own books out there. I can put them on my shelf. I can put them right next to some famous authors and be like, look how cool my books are. They're right next to that person's. But having that team and that encouragement and the other people around me is what really made me think, I want to do more of this. So, each of the books kind of came out yearly. One was a little over the year, but yeah, that's really when I wanted to just keep going at this. If this could be my full-time job, I'd 100% take it. Not yet, but hopefully we'll get there.
Yeah, I hope so. That's fantastic. Really cool.
So, sorry.
No, you go ahead, Dave.
I was just going to say, you mentioned that you've written two historical novels set in ancient Egypt. So did you have to do a lot of research for that? And, could you tell us maybe a little bit about the research that you did?
Yeah, I had so many books just open around me. So first I created like this timeline. So that way I knew when they were this years old, this is where kind of the country was at. This is what some of the big events that was happening. Were there any foreign relations going on? Was there any sort of drought? How could you... I wanted to keep everything as accurate as possible, because I've never really liked when authors write a book and then at the end you find, well, I changed things by about 100 years because it fit the story better.
Yeah.
I'd be like, what? That just kind of takes away some of the authenticity for me. So I had that timeline, and then I had like this family tree that was going on. And then I had all my books. And when I was starting a certain section, I'd look at that, kind of year and have it open. And if I was looking at some of the worship practices, I'd take out those books and I'd take a look at them. Again, I have I think 50 books just on my own collection. And then sometimes, I'd go to the library or I'd check it. I love all the different magazines. Sometimes they have in the articles of new discoveries. And in fact, after I published my first book, it's about King Tut. So he's going to die. They discovered a new way how he died. And I was like, what? I just published this. So I did actually go back in and kind of do a revision of it. And I updated the ending maybe a little to fit with the historical evidence. And that made me feel better. But yeah, I keep all those books like fingertip right at there, because I just want to make sure I get some of those details correct. So other people who maybe don't know about the time period can find out how cool it is and why I think it's so fascinating. So that was kind of my process. Lots of paper everywhere.
That's the best way, isn't it? Yeah. So, you're doing all this research. We're talking about ancient Egypt, such a different time. Very little, I would think, at least in terms of the way they were living life, maybe very little for us to relate to today. So do you ever find, because I even find this with the Victorian era, do you ever find, David Payne is saying, I hate when history corrects me, definitely a process. Yeah. Do you ever find that, you stumble across a part of life in that time that it never even occurred to you to think about? I mean, it may be something even obvious for the people who lived then, but now it's like, this would never occur to me to even look up.
I always think about, well, first of all, you got to think of just patterns of speech and references. I wouldn't have someone back then saying, oh, that is so cool. No, how would you use a metaphor back then? It's really something like, what would they reference? I mean, I live in the US and they live in ancient Egypt. I live in Minnesota. I've got a completely different climate than they used to live in. They have kind of a drier heat, so smells are a little different versus the more moist air that we have here. So yeah, it was a lot of thinking back and looking at kind of and even how the Nile flowed. It flows opposite than you think, you know?
Yeah.
It goes up instead of down as you would expect it to. So there's all these little nuances that as a reader too, I'm very discerning, and if somebody says something that I'm just like, whoa, no, like I was reading a book set in 1930 and they use the reference serial killer, and I'm like, no, that actually wasn't established till the 70s, actually, that term. So they would have used something different.
Yeah.
So it's really, I start with kind of those patterns of speech, and sometimes you have to think about what would they have to eat then, even. I've heard some reviewers comment on how different eras or different places in the world, we all eat like oranges and tomatoes, but some places didn't have it back in a certain time period, and it's something you just so easily just slips your mind. You're just so accustomed to it. So I always start with just kind of metaphors and thinking about that aspect, and then broadening that to think about, how was their streets? How'd they walk around? I mean, Rome was the one who built all the straight, narrow roads. So, their form of travel is more on the water. Think of how different travel might be. I'd get motion sick all the time, but I bet it was nice and relaxing for some people instead of having to walk and hoof it everywhere. So yeah, a lot of different aspects, especially in such a different world that I'm used to. So yeah, lots of reading, lots of watching different specials, things like that. And I see you mentioned your historical fantasy and suspense. I'd love to know what you write.
Victorian era.
Ooh.
It's so funny that you mentioned the serial killer thing, because I had to also you're exactly right. That term didn't exist, and it was mass murder, at least in my time period. I don't know what it would be, before that point, but it was so funny you mentioned that, because I had to look that up too. And I was like, oh my goodness, it's not serial killer. What is it?
Yeah.
Yeah, I have to use a lot with the dictionaries. I mean, even simple words like jog didn't necessarily mean the same thing. You can't get them all, but you can try.
You can do your best. Yes, we do our best.
Yeah, Nina brings up an interesting thing here with even regards to food and stuff. Foods are so different all over the world. So she's writing a Renaissance set book with no tomatoes in the food. Like what kind of civilization doesn't have ketchup?
Or spaghetti sauce. Yeah.
Yeah. Whenever I read, Rick is saying it's amazing how quickly language changes even in one decade. That is really, really true.
And different cultures too. So I think in America, you say someone's nerdy or something, you say they're so square, but in ancient Egypt, you'd say they were so triangular.
Oh, is that? Yes.
Sorry.
Or pyramidal.
You can show yourself out.
Oh my goodness. Yeah, about the food stuff. That's one of those tricky things also, because it can depend on like the area you're in and everything. I'm sure you've seen, depending on where you are, maybe where the characters are located in Egypt, it might be different what foods are available here and there. Just like in the Victorian era, it's the same thing. Different foods are available. The postal service was different depending on where you were located. I'm sure there's a lot of that for you as well.
And the climate was very different. Just the land looks so different. And I love seeing the pictures that are rendered. I'm like, think of how beautiful that would have been. I mean, it wouldn't have been beautiful living back then and getting lice all the time, but just so picturesque otherwise.
Richard,
yeah, I mean, I read somewhere recently, and it was saying that like even the classic idea of like the pyramid building is now kind of in doubt, and that the people who built them weren't necessarily slaves, and they were actually very skilled artisans that were paid.
Yes, thank you. That's very true. I'm always trying to tell people that it's not slaves. Back then, they rotated them. Like they had different seasons that different people would go, so they wouldn't interrupt like the food production and the farming, because the way the Nile rose, they only had a certain period of time that they could harvest those fields. So yeah, it was so cool to see they had these wonderful like towns and bakers, and they gave them food. I'm not saying they were super generous and rich, but they were actually paid workers who did it. So yes, thank you for bringing that up. I love saying no, not slaves, at least not for the pyramid. No.
I thought it was aliens.
What'd you say, Richard?
I thought it was aliens that built the pyramid.
No. I don't buy into that at all. No, thank you.
So speaking of food, Anita's saying tomatoes are a New World food and time considered poison. Wow. I wouldn't get along in that culture, that's for sure.
Yeah, right.
Rick Jones says, I think bananas were a rare and exotic treat in Britain in the 40s, but it's something simply, yeah, no kidding. Yeah. And bananas are one of the cheap foods still, which is nice.
Yeah.
Everything else is going through the roof.
Not in all cases.
Oh, no?
No, they make me nauseous.
Oh, I see.
What's that, a banana?
Yeah.
Yeah. I'm just saying that they seem to be withstanding the inflation war that we're having with all our other foods. So, yeah, so that'd be interesting too. Is that the monetary systems and stuff like that you have to research. Yeah. But I'm intrigued by Avalon books. Being a fantasy writer, I'm a big fan of the Arthurian legend. I've read so many different accounts of King Arthur and Merlin, and I imagine the research into that must have been a bit different because you're not actually researching factual events, but you still have to do a lot of research into fleshing out the classic tale and making sure that you kind of stick to it. I know you're going to deviate and do your own thing with it, but there's still got to be some points you have to hit to keep the Arthurian people that really like the Arthurian legend wanting to keep reading your book.
Yeah, I think the main thing I try and keep is the land itself, Avalon, kind of separated after King Arthur died, after his last battle at Camlann. What's hard is that there's so much stuff that's written after that time, and so many things written after that time. I mean, the legend of Guinevere and Lancelot is a so much later creation than some of the earlier writing. So it's really finding those pieces that feel like an essence, kind of. You want to keep that majesty, that Excalibur legend, and because Excalibur wasn't actually the sword pulled from the stone, that was Caliburn. So you want to keep some of that stuff in there, but also keep it to this. You want to keep that magic, but also take a different spin, like you said. There are different things you can touch upon and different things you can really enhance and look at. So I really brought some of those women who are in it, the Lady of the Lake, Guinevere, Morgan Le Fay. I wanted to bring them in. Now, this is more modern times now. They've been living in Avalon, kind of parallel but separate from Earth. And there are still some connections to Earth, which is how our friends, our 4 teenagers, get there, is through a witching well, which is actually still connected to Avalon. So I wanted to keep some of those very essential legends kind of in there, but also broaden them a bit and flesh out some of these characters that there are so many stories written about. And you always have to keep in mind too, I'm an author. I'm going to embellish some things, like I'm sure many authors back then embellished things. So take things with a grain of salt, but keep that just beautiful essence that is there in those legends.
Absolutely. So as long as you touch on a couple of key points here and there, and then just go off on your own, it feels like you're actually in that land again for sure. So our resident minion has come on here because he is.
Blessed be the bananas. That's wonderful.
If you ever want to know about bananas, just talk to JD.
Double the bananas.
I do see a question there.
Yeah, was Arthurian legend based from mainland Europe or Scandinavian legends?
Interesting. That's interesting. I know that a lot of the Arthurian legend kind of happened, at least what we know, happened after the Romans left. So they left England in this period where the Vikings were coming over, and some of the other, like there was Wales, there was the Ireland. All these people are coming in because this country is broken apart. The Romans did such a great job of kind of eradicating many of the tribes and breaking them up. So Arthur was the one, his legend is based on someone who tried to reunite them again and keep that culture from those invaders who are coming in. So really I can see how there's a lot of Scandinavian in there too, because these people are coming and starting to inhabit the one side of the island. They're being pushed in from the other side. It's a very turbulent time period. So I think it's hard to tell where everything originates from, but it's definitely, these legends have come from that combination of these cultures clashing and coming together. Would you agree with that, Richard? Because I know you were saying you know a lot of it.
Absolutely. One of my favorite authors with the Arthurian legend is Jack White. He was a Canadian author. He's left us now, but and he was out on the West Coast. But he wrote the Sky Stone, and then beyond that, and he starts as a Roman legionnaire, and they're in England, and you're just like you mentioned, the Roman legions are starting to pull out, and some of the Roman legions stay behind because they want to live in England. They've met women or whatever. They're establishing themselves. And the really cool thing I thought about this one was how his take on Merlin, because Merlin was he wasn't magical, because this is Earth, right? So we don't really have magic, contrary to how some people might believe. But he would play on the people's superstitions. And he would do these things, and people would think he's magical, and they would think he was a wizard just because he could do these things that they couldn't understand. And I thought it was really neat how he spun that tale. So, yeah, it definitely took place as the Romans were doing their mass exodus back to Europe.
Yeah, there were some druids around, so I'm sure that Merlin character comes from a lot of the druid beliefs and legends, and that superstition. Yeah, that sacred isle that they destroyed so many druids. Honestly, I'm just going to be transparent here. I hate Rome. I think they are the evil empire of the ancient world. So I disparage them often because they, Cleopatra, England, just stop it. Stay in your own little realm. But anyway, so that's
they built nice straight roads. So that's
yeah, great straight roads. I think we could have figured that out.
You can march your troops
time.
Have you read
indoor plumbing as well?
Yeah. Jalen, have you read what David is suggesting?
No, but I want to. I think that would be wonderful. If I will come back and I'll write those down after the broadcast so I can check these out, because I love historical fiction. I've been reading a lot of that kind of historical fiction set during that time. Some set in Scotland around that time, and about the walls that Romans built, and crossing these walls, and I just thought it was so fascinating. I've been reading a lot of those works recently, so always interesting, always fascinating.
I just brought up the cover of Descendants of Avalon there.
Thank you. Isn't that pretty?
Looks great.
I love the portal in the background with the sword. I was like, we have to have a sword. Please put a sword in there.
And you got it in? That's awesome.
I got it in.
Yeah, and I can feel David's pain. Sorry, Dave, I had to use a pun there, but I drove in England. I actually went over to England and Scotland, and I drove in England. And when we hit Scotland, they do not have a straight road anywhere. And all the roads are about 8 inches wide, and they have 2 cars going down them, and they're just crazy.
Oh my goodness.
Nothing straight, so I was hitting every curve.
We have a couple of comments from JD. He's saying, fascinating, reminds me a bit of when I went to Spain. There was a chapel that had a mosque built over it that had a church built over it.
That had to be so interesting to look at those styles just kind of crashing into each other.
Yeah. That is crazy. Oh my goodness.
That would be interesting, though, because I imagine as you go down deep into the cellars and stuff of these old buildings, that you'd see where the cultures collide.
Yeah. I would think so too.
I do also need a cowbell. Thank you.
Both.
I love that.
We'll do both. And he also has a question. He says, random cue for everyone. What are some differences with a solid retelling and one that isn't? I don't write myth stuff, so that is everyone else.
I think it's fun to explore that. Like solid retelling, I think one thing I love about reading so many different works of other authors out there is that we all have our own voice. If you think about it, if all of us got the same plot and characters and they said, write the story, we'd all write it differently because we all have our own voice, our own point of view. And I don't think there can really be per se a straight retelling so much anymore, because we all have our own kind of ways that we view the world, ways we say things in this world, and we express ourselves. But I love reading some of those twists and kind of new ways to look at the legends while keeping that just majesty of it. So you still feel, you still get those feelings, but you get to see it from a different perspective.
Mhm.
Those are some of my favorites. Not saying the retellings aren't great also. They really help kind of ground me in certain things and everything. So, but I just love those little twists and new discoveries that you can find from all different people out there with their different ways of looking at things.
Mm.
Yes, new telling.
I like
It's
that
probably a
word.
better way to say it for sure.
Yeah. And Rick says probably embellishments and integration from either a person perspective, or maybe generational and upbringing. Yeah.
But I mean, the interesting thing is, I mean, like the stories that we actually have from those times anyway are actually the product of embellishments, retellings, you know, and exaggerations and things getting mixed together. So I mean, it's like, you know, what's real, what's, you know, kind of like what's not. You know, I mean, there's no history of King Arthur, for example. You know, I mean, there's nothing you can say for definite about King Arthur except, you know, that somebody came up with the idea and told a story, you know, but that's it. There's nothing factual there. So, and, you know, even with things like Egypt, you know, I mean, yeah, we have, you know, various records and we have some kind of information about the time period. But again, I mean, it's like, as we've mentioned, I mean, we're always finding out new things and new details. So, I mean, you know, how much of that is actual kind of like factual story and how much of it is just, you know, exaggeration and you know, retelling and, you know, maybe even propaganda, you know, because I mean, like every time a new ruler came along, they tried to wipe out what had gone before.
Yeah,
You know,
propaganda is a big one.
Yeah.
You know, and they tried to demonize the rulers that came before. So I mean, you know, it's all kind of faction, I guess.
Yeah. Yeah. That's a good point.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, every storyteller will have their own bias towards however they see the world and whatever they're writing about. So, and like Jalen said, if we all do the same story, we're all going to say it differently. So, and I think that's what makes storytelling so unique. And if we all wrote the same story, we'd only have to have one author and one book. We wouldn't have to read anything else. So,
Me.
Just you.
Oh, I didn't know it was like, you know, we had to call dibs. Dang.
I got there first.
That's it for us. Done. Oh my goodness.
And this is so true, especially with social media.
That is
Absolutely.
true.
That social media is certainly brought to the forefront of our culture. That's for sure.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
I think wasn't it Goebbels who first said that about if you tell a lie, often if it becomes a truth, and even the people telling the lie start to believe it.
Start to believe it. Absolutely. Yeah.
And someone much less George Costanza for any Seinfeld fans. It's not a lie if you believe it, you know. So we have that too. Oh my goodness.
So I noticed. Sorry.
Go ahead. No, go ahead.
I was just going to say, I noticed in an interview that you mentioned that Katharine Hepburn was someone you really admired. And so I was wondering if kind of like screenwriting from classic movies of her era have been an inspiration to you, and perhaps some of the female characters from those films too.
I really enjoyed her as a person because she was very outspoken in a time when women weren't supposed to be. And she was still so successful. She wore pants. She played golf. I mean, this was unheard of.
Yeah.
And I just found that so inspiring. Growing up as a girl, I remember this story. Maybe you guys took typing classes. I took it in middle school. We had a typing class. And I remember you'd have to read something and type it at the same time, and they time you. And one of the things we had to type was about this new product for homemakers and how all the homemakers were mothers, wives, women. And I've always been very fast at typing. So I got done. And little middle school me was like, I find this article extremely sexist. I think men can stay at home too, and men should have a say in these products too. Sassy little me. What does the teacher do? And I think this is very smart of him. He crossed off all the women and he deducted me like, 1/5 of a point because I was a big deal about it being women. And so then he marked it off and said it should have been he's. So I could have been more subtle about my protesting. So someone like Katharine Hepburn who would speak out about that, I was like, I was doing it in the wrong, immature way, but I always wanted to be that bold and kind of be that trailblazer. And I do enjoy now stories about women, girl power, especially women in antiquity. It's so interesting how they exerted power in a time when they didn't have any, and how they were successful in some things. I mean, think about Boudica, this whole uprising against the Romans that she led that was quite successful for a little while. That's unheard of. The Romans were like, why are these women carrying swords? Like, this is so weird, So, yes, Katharine Hepburn was one of those early kind of persons who I saw, we used to get Turner Classic Movies, and I just really liked her poise, her presence. She's someone who I aspired to be, someone who I wanted to just kind of emulate. But yeah, I was so young, I kind of did it the wrong way sometimes, but,
She was very independent. She was not
Yes.
going to be pressured into getting married or anything like you're supposed to do at the time.
No. I thought that was really interesting.
It is. Yeah. I love looking into Golden Age Hollywood people. They're amazing.
It's so glamorous too. Like, it's okay to be glamorous, but also strong and witty. There's just this beautiful juxtaposition that is in that era. So I don't feel inspired so much to write about it yet, but I am still a little, have that glamour eyes, like those stars in my eyes when I look at some of those old pictures, and just so sweet.
Yeah,
so cool.
Absolutely. I feel the same way.
I'm looking at the time, and I can't believe how fast this has gone by. We've had a lot of interaction today, Jalen, and that must be a tribute to you. We generally get some interaction, but I think the most interaction we've had in the show. So, congratulations! You've attracted some kind of crowd here. And
yay! Thank you, everybody, for interacting. I love the comments.
Yeah,
and
no,
more cowbell
for sure. Yeah. So. Anyway, before we say goodbye to you, what's next for Lynn Else?
So my children's book should be coming out early next year. It's about a young elephant who joins her first ballet class. And I'm so excited. She turned out so cute. I illustrated it, colored it, wrote it. So I'm so excited to see this come to fruition, because I wrote it like 15 years ago when my kids were little. And my publisher was actually interested in it when I mentioned, hey, I have this children's book. So I'm excited for that to come out. That'll be next. And I'm kind of in between what story I really want to pursue. I have a ancient Egypt one again that's more fantasy related, about some of the gods and Sekhmet and all that. And another fantasy, kind of Rapunzel-ish, but also with some dragons. So a few things I'm working on. But yeah, keep an eye out for my children's book. I'm so thrilled. I'll be posting lots of TikToks and Instagrams, and maybe Hive if I can figure it out by then.
Well, you certainly have me interested when you mentioned dragons. So
dragons!
We've got your website going across the bottom of the screen. I imagine we find your books there. Where else can we find your books? Are you exclusive to Amazon? Are you wide?
It is a different, I'm not exclusive to Amazon. Some of my historical fiction is, but the trilogy is not. And you can also find it at inklingspublishing.com on their website. They do have a bundle sale right now. You can get all 3 of the books for only $35. Nice. So that's like $10 off. I'm very excited. I would love to go on this journey with all of you. Strategist, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Jones. But yeah, so you can find me in all sorts of places on the internet, and yes, Amazon and Barnes & Noble, any place you buy books. If you do e-readers, you can find it like Kobo and everything. So I hope to be all over the place.
That's awesome. So we wish you the best of luck, and we look forward to hearing all about your children's book next year.
Thank you. Thank you all.
So next week's guest is nonfiction children's author, and I've never considered a children's author of fiction, but I guess it is. When I read this earlier when I was putting it down on my screen, I'm thinking, I guess that's true. So nonfiction be a little bit different. So in children's books, I don't know why I associate children's books as nonfiction, but they wouldn't be, because we don't really have elephants doing ballet. So next week's guest is nonfiction and children's author Christine Milkovich Krause. During the pandemic, her family fostered pets that brought so much joy into their lives. And when they saw Teddy, they knew he belonged with their family at the moment they met him. Teddy's uniqueness and character inspired a series of stories that Christine hopes to share with avid child readers who love animals. So we look forward to it. We haven't had too many children's authors on here, so it'll be interesting speaking to one next week. So anyway, thank you again, Jalen, for coming on our show. We really appreciate you being here with us. We enjoyed the chat, and so did our viewers.
Thank you. I appreciated being on here, and good luck with all of your works. It sounds so awesome. So thank you, and thank you to all those out there.
So for Christy, Jalen, David, and myself, we hope everyone has an amazing week ahead. Until we meet again, take good care.
Good night.